CEO of Lazard Brothers, so-called international Jewish banking house. Actually, it was controlled by a member of the Round Table, just as in the United States, Lehman Brothers. Boy, doesn't that sound Jewish? Who was headed by Pete Peterson, a Greek who became chairman of the board of the Council on Foreign Relations for many years. And so they keep those Jewish names out there, and they do it intentionally, so that your attention will be diverted from what this is really all about. But so many of these organizations are actually headed by people who tie into this secret society who are not Jewish at all. So let's, then we had Lord Cecil, and so there were actually 5 people on one side, and they were all part of the British aristocracy. They were the ruling elite, and 3 of them, Brand, Milner, and Leopold Amory, were all part of the Round Table group. On the other side, you had H.G. Wells, you had George Bernard Shaw, you had Bertrand Russell, you had Sidney and Beatrice Webb, and you had the founders of the Fabian Socialists. And they plotted for a number of years how they would bring about a one-world socialist government. In fact, coming out of those meetings, Wells wrote 2 books. One, The Open Conspiracy, and said, we're going to be in charge of Moscow probably long before we control New York. We're going to create a one-world government just exactly as they have in Russia with socialism. The bankers are going to help us. This is The Open Conspiracy by H.G. Wells. The other was a book called The New World Order, in which he talked about how the one world government was coming. Both of these books, according to Wells, in his book, An Experiment in Autobiography, actually came out of those meetings between the ruling aristocracy of England, who were tied into this secret society, and the Fabian Socialists. So you saw the socialists from below and the other people from above, and of course Brand tied into banking, Milner was tied into banking, people, and Cecil, Lord Cecil was there, was tied into banking. The most powerful men in England were plotting with the Fabian Socialists on how they would bring socialism. Why did they want socialism? Isn't socialism going to take from the rich and give to the poor? No, it's going to bring everybody under the control of the rich. That's what it's really all about, because they always will control the government buying and selling politicians. They did it in England, and they've done it in America. Socialism is said to be a sincere, benevolent, idealistic theory, but it doesn't work without force. And somebody's going to be in control of that socialist society. And even Karl Marx, when he wrote the Communist Manifesto, talked about the dictatorship not by the proletariat, but of the proletariat. It was a dictatorship by which the common people would be controlled. And that's really what they were planning on. But H.G. Wells wrote another book. It was called The New Machiavellis. And it was a story, now in novel form, admittedly, but it was the story of a secret society that was headed by a German. It was an English secret society that controlled the English government, that was headed by a German. And of course, Lord Milner was a German. I mean, he was a British citizen, but he was of German extraction. And of course, only fictional, except that Leo Amory, in his diary, refers to that book, and he says, and we have Leo Amory's diary, and he says, hey, H.G. Wells was talking about our group. That was us. So here we have 3 people who attest to the formation of a secret society in England. Then we have an American. His name was Frederick Howe. And Frederick Howe was at the Paris peace negotiations after the carnage of Europe had come to an end. And he was a real idealist. I mean, he was one of these head-in-the-clouds liberals who could justify the First World War because England had to honor a 50-year-old treaty with Belgium where England promised that they would defend Belgium if attacked. And so treaties were sacred, and if treaties weren't honored, how would we ever have world peace, the world law? How would we ever have the Parliament of Man, the federation of the world? And so Frederick Howe was there in England with Colonel House, and Howe was one of the chief men in this whole movement. It was called the Inquiry. And there you saw Thomas Lamont, who was a partner in J.P. Morgan, and you have John Foster Dulles, and Allen Dulles was there. Christian Herter, you remember Christian Herter became Secretary of State. John Foster Dulles became Secretary of State. Allen Dulles head of the CIA. But all these men, this was 1919. But Howe was there too. And he was asked to go over all of the treaties dealing with Palestine, the Palestine area. And because he was actually President Wilson, and the House wanted him to enter and help with the American input on the negotiations. What did he find? Well, he found, first of all, that the English, who gone into the war because they believed in treaties, world rule through world law, and treaties were sacred, almost like the Bible, The English had first of all promised the Arabs that if they came in on the English side, that they'd give them Palestine. Then they made a secret treaty with the French, and they promised that they'd give the French Palestine. And then they promised to give, through the Balfour Declaration, the Jews Palestine. And they'd given Palestine to 3 different groups. And suddenly Frederick Howe realized they don't believe in treaties at all. It's all been for nothing. All these people have died. This carnage, this horror. I mean, you talk about warfare. I mean, what happened on the Western Front and the bayonet charges, the trench warfare. 4 bloody, horrible years. If you've ever read into the stories of the people who were there, horrible, horrible, horrible carnage. It's all been for nothing. And so Frederick Howe said, what was it really all about? And so Frederick Howe thought, well, it has to do with economic imperialism. Maybe it had to do with commercial interests, so that the British would be able, commercial interests would have a better trading advantage over the Germans. Maybe that was what it was about. And then he said that a group of men came to him. They were known as Lord Milner's men, and he named them. They were the men who surrounded the Prime Minister at that time. This is 1919. The Prime Minister of England is Lloyd George. And they said to Frederick Howe, you know, we've got to get you to join with us to create this world government. This is what it's all about. And he said, you know, they didn't even know the meaning of the term economic imperialism. And they told him the war had nothing to do with economic imperialism. It had to do with the white man's burden to rule the world. The white man has to rule the world. That's our obligation. That's our destiny. And that's why the war had to be fought to its conclusion. Because without that, they wouldn't have destroyed the existing social structure of Europe. It's all there, Confessions of a Reformer. But of course, you're never going to hear most of these things from Ted Koppel or Dan Rather or Barbara Walters. Well, they have one other person who will attest to what this is really all about, Admiral Chester Ward. Admiral Ward is quoted in Barry Goldwater's excellent book. Actually, we have the quotation in here, or you can get it from Kissinger on the Couch, which Chester Ward wrote with Phyllis Schlafly. And Admiral Ward, 16 years in the Council on Foreign Relations, finally came out and said, look, he said, this is what it's all about. There is a small clique within this organization that is totally dedicated to the destruction of national sovereignty, and they're totally dedicated to world government. And of course, he felt this was terrible. He was a man, a member of the military, a Judge Advocate General of the Navy, who really believed in America's independent state. He realized the Council on Foreign Relations was being used to program people to support this internationalist dream for the Parliament of Man, the federation of the world. So how then does this all tie together? Well, Monsieur Perot, as he was looking at all of the suspects, realized that in the dead man's body there were 12 stab wounds, and there were 12 suspects, every one of whom had a motive to kill the American. And he said, there are too many clues. 12 stab wounds, 12 people, all with a motive. Well, as we look at what's going on in the world today, how do we begin to put this together? And so let's just take what Professor Quigley has told us about the origins of the Council on Foreign Relations, and let's go back to Cecil John Rhodes. Who was he really? What motivated Cecil John Rhodes? And what most people do not understand is Cecil Rhodes had entered the Masonic Lodge. He had sworn the oaths of fidelity to the light. Now, how many of you here, well, I won't ask that because probably most of you know what the light is in Masonry, but if you go into the Blue Lodge of Masonry, the first thing you do is they blindfold you, they put a noose around your neck, they bare your chest here, and then they roll up your pant leg, and then they march you up before the worshipful master and they say, what do you most want? And you're told you're supposed to say the light. So you say the light. And then you go into the second level of the lodge and they say, what do you most want? And you're supposed to say more light. And then the third level of the lodge, why you want even more light. But you never know what the light is. Nobody ever tells you. In fact, you're told as you go up to the levels of the lodge that they're going to tell you the secret. Trouble is that they never tell you the secret. You may catch a glimpse of this as you read the esoteric writings of Masonry, but most people within the Masonic Lodge are intentionally deceived. And if you read Morals and Dogma, written by Albert Pike, he will tell you, intentionally deceive people coming into the lodge. Why? Because we don't want them to know. Most of them are not worthy to know the real secret. If you read Manly Hall, now Albert Pike died in 1891. During the 20th century, the leading Masonic philosopher is a man named Manly P. Hall. In fact, he had his headquarters right down here in the Los Angeles area. I don't know if you know of it, but Manly P. Hall had written extensively on Masonry before he ever joined the lodge. Became a 33rd degree Mason, one of the leading Masonic philosophers. And he said, Masonry is a fraternity within a fraternity. Most Masons are wonderful people. They have a good time. They do good things. But there is an inner fraternity dedicated to the mystery, to the secrets. And of course, Manly Hall wrote extensively on what those secrets were. And of course, unless you understand those secrets, you can't understand what energized Cecil John Rhodes, or why the symbol is on the back of the American dollar bill. What does that symbol really stand for? What does it really mean? And why is nobody concerned that that symbol is on the back of the dollar bill? Well, first of all, you can read what the occultists will tell you. They will tell you that the pyramid has to do with pagan rites. And in pagan rites for the last 5,000 to 6,000 years, the pyramid has been the symbol. It's got 13 steps on it. It has nothing to do with 13 colonies. 13 is a secret occult number that gives tremendous power. The term above, which I can't pronounce, but it has to do with he favors our venture. The Novus Ordo Seclorum has to do with the new social order, the new order of the ages. 1776, they will tell you, has to do with the date when America was created. And the all-seeing eye above is the eye of the God, of the sun, the eye of light. Well, Cecil Rhodes, after going and entering the Masonic Lodge and hearing the lecture by John Ruskin, suddenly became consumed with this idea that it was his destiny to create a one-world government. Now, we knew he'd never lived to see it come to pass, but he believed that he would form the foundation for this one-world government. And he began then to recruit men to his cause. You remember there were three men initially. There was William Stead, there was Lord Esher, his name was Brett, and there was Lord Milner. Stead was an occultist. He was a member of the Theosophical Organization. He was deeply involved in spiritualism. Why was he interested in getting into an organization with Cecil Rhodes? Because occultists, and you read occult writings, they will all tell you we're moving towards a new age. We're moving towards a new one-world government. We're moving towards a new spirituality. If you read the material which we have, read Carol Quigley's book, read the pages from White's book, actually taken from Stead's diary, you'll find out that the second level of the secret society was a man named Lord Balfour, Arthur Balfour. And Arthur Balfour had formed the Society for Psychical Research. And Professor Quigley tells us in his book, The Anglo-American Establishment, that the men who joined with Milner after Cecil Rhodes' death primarily came from the Society for Psychical Research. They were all into the occult. And this is the common denominator behind everything that's going on. If you go into the Council on Foreign Relations today, you'll be amazed to find how many of these men are into the Lucis Trust, are into Theosophy, are into Masonry, and the underlying focus of everything that's going on today is occultism working within every one of these organizations. Now, most people think communism is an atheistic form of philosophy. In other words, Karl Marx was an atheist. He talked about religion being the opiate of the masses. And then most people are usually incredibly naive. Karl Marx was a Satanist. And if you haven't read the book, Marx and Satan by Reverend Wurmbrand, who spent 14 years in a communist prison, you have to, and we carry that through our ministry. And Marx and Proudhon and Bakunin, who were the three leading socialists at that time, were all into Satanism, and they embraced socialism as a means of destroying Christian civilization, Western civilization. That's what it was really all about. Mikhail Gorbachev today is a New Ager. You go to his State of the Union, State of the World forums in San Francisco or down in Mexico, and the whole theme is occultism. And what does Mikhail Gorbachev talk about? What we need is a one world order, a new world order, and a new world spirituality. at the recent conference that was held in Rio de Janeiro. It was called the Earth Summit Plus 5, or whatever the original meeting was there in 1992. They had a new one earlier this year in 1997. And they're stressing new spirituality. What are they talking about? They're talking about doing away with the Judeo-Christian ethic and replacing it with a new world religion. If you get into the background of Masonry and you begin studying what the Masonic philosophers will tell you about the light, if you read Albert Pike, and he actually goes into some detail talking about, and here I think on page 321, he says, Lucifer, the light bearer. Strange the mysterious name to give to the spirit of darkness. Lucifer, the son of the morning. He says, he who bears the light, doubt it not. Lucifer is the god of Masonry. And if you doubt that, we can give you all sorts of references, but probably Manly Hall is the best source of that. And his quotation is really very, very clear. And he basically talks about the strength of a man was not given to be used destructively, but that he might build a temple worthy to be the dwelling place of the great architect of the universe. When the Mason learns that the key is the proper application of the dynamo of living power, he shall have understood the mystery of the craft and the seething energies of Lucifer in his hands. And that comes from his book, The Lost Keys of Freemasonry. It's all Luciferian. That's the driving force behind Masonry and Theosophy and the Lucis Trust, behind communism, behind the Council on Foreign Relations. Behind all of this is Luciferianism. Of course, here we're out there, we're trying to, elect people to public office, and we're going to save things, we're going to save America because we're going to elect Bob Dole to the president. He's a 33rd degree Mason. And so was Jack Kemp, who ran with him, and they were running against Bill Clinton, who comes from the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission and the Bilderbergers. Did you ever give a sucker an even chance? This symbol is the symbol of the mystery religions. The mystery religions, which have always been there since antiquity, since the Garden of Eden. The battle really started in the Garden of Eden. You saw it played out when Cain killed Abel. Why? Because Cain resented the fact that there was supposed to be a blood sacrifice, and God didn't want his sacrifice of grain. He hated Abel because Abel was favored by God. It was the same battle that you saw when God destroyed the whole earth, other than Noah at the time of the Great Flood. And you saw it played out when you had the destruction of the Temple of Babylon, when Nimrod wanted to unite all civilization under his leadership. You saw it at the Mount of Temptation when the devil offered Christ the whole of the world, all the kingdoms of the earth, if you'd only kneel down and worship him. And that same battle is being played out today in our halls of Congress, in our Supreme Court, being played out in our schools. There's a battle between good and evil. But it's not imaginary, it's not theoretical. How do you explain abortion today with worldwide probably the murder of 500 million unborn children? How do you explain the AIDS epidemic, which today is decimating Africa? We have the statistics out of Africa. They're being collected by the U.S. Census Bureau. Doesn't that make you feel good? We're monitoring the HIV epidemic in Africa. Now, we're not monitoring it in America. We have no statistics in America that are comparable to what we have out of Africa. But in Africa, if you look at the nations in Central and Southern Africa, the capital cities, and any of you want this, we'll be glad to send it to you or tell you how you can call the U.S. Census Bureau and get it. The incidence, low incidence, that's you and me that have no identifiable risk factors, about 15 to 36% are infected, they're all going to die. High risk, that's Army, the people in the government who use prostitutes, people with STDs, from about 40 to 86%. In Harare, 32% of the low-risk people, the capital city of Zimbabwe, 86% of the military and high-risk people are all infected and they're all going to die. The greatest human tragedy of all time. And what are you reading in your newspapers? Well, less people are dying in America from the disease. Now, they don't tell you the same number of people are coming down with AIDS every year, 50,000 a year, but less people are dying because we have medicines. But that's not doing any good in Africa and Asia, where they're allowing this epidemic to be used for genocide. If you read the Bible, you read Revelation 6, 8, they tell that a quarter of the world is going to be destroyed by famine and plague. And if you read NIV, I believe, one of the other, it talks about by the plagues. This is a biblical plague of truly biblical proportions. We're involved in the most amazing battle of all time, and everybody's fighting the wrong enemy. And it's about time that people started talking about what Masonry really represents, because we've got the writings of the Masons who tell you it's Luciferian. And I don't care what the people say, well, it's good. Look all the good we do. Look at all the good Adolf Hitler did. He put in great new roads all across Europe, the Autobahns. And they improved the health care. And they improved the education for the people of Germany. Of course, the people in the occupied areas, they didn't give much education to, as Adolf Hitler said, just teach them how to be able to read the road signs so they can stay out of the way of my tanks, but don't educate them. And that's why we're not educating the kids in America today, because we're intentionally dumbing them down. Well, that's why we've taken God out of our schools, and 4 of the 6 Supreme Court judges who voted to take God out of our schools were Masons. The Masons have always wanted to destroy Christianity in America and to destroy the fabric of this society, and that's simply the inner core of this Masonic organization. Now, much of what I've told you about the background of the Council on Foreign Relations is contained in this, and we're working on a new treatise. We'll have it in a couple of weeks. So those of you who listen to my radio program every Saturday on K-Bright, let's get a plug in. It's noon every Saturday, 7:40 a.m. We'll tell you as soon as this is available. And it'll have the documentation for everything that I've told you tonight, or get a copy of this tape. And you can help to support the Granada Forum by getting it, this nice gentleman who's doing this, or get a tape of this and listen to it and get the source documentation, and then help us to get the word out. Many years ago, Whittaker Chambers left the Communist Party and identified Alger Hiss as having been a communist spy. Now, Alger Hiss was the man who wrote the United Nations Charter. He was at Yalta with President Roosevelt. He was the president of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. At the time, he was identified as a communist spy. And of course, Alger Hiss lashed out at Whittaker Chambers and said what the mean, demeaning little man he was. And he was sort of fat and dumpy. And he really wasn't very good looking. He didn't have very nice teeth. And of course, Alger Hiss was a member of the aristocracy. He was also deeply involved with this whole world occult movement. And Whittaker Chambers said, well, do you hate Alger Hiss? He's attacking you. And Whittaker Chambers said, I could never hate any man who believed as I